I now call upon Brother John.
Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you are already born. You have lived so many years. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain, and a path for the thunderstorm, to water a land where no man lives, a desert with no one in it, to satisfy a desolate wasteland, and make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens, when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen? Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, here we are? Who endowed the heart with wisdom, or gave understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens, when the dust becomes hard and the clods of earth stick together? Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions, when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in a thicket? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? They crouch down and bring forth their young. Their labor pains are ended. Their young thrive and grow strong in the wilds. They leave and do not return. Who let the wild donkey go free? Who untied his ropes? I gave him the wasteland as his home, the salt flats as his habitat. He laughs at the commotion in the town. He does not hear a driver's shout. He ranges the hills for his pasture and searches for any green thing. Will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will he stay by your manger at night? Can you hold him to the furrow with a harness? Will he till the valleys behind you? Will you rely on him for his great strength? Will you leave your heavy work to him? Can you trust him to bring in your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, but they cannot compare with the pinions and feathers of the stork. She lays her eggs on the ground and lets them warm in the sand, unmindful that a foot may crush them, that some wild animal may trample them. She treats her young harshly, as if they were not hers. She cares not that her labor was in vain, for God did not endow her with wisdom or give her a share of good sense. Yet when she spreads her feathers to run, she laughs at horse and rider. Do you give the horse his strength, or clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Do you make him leap like a locust, striking terror with his proud snorting? He paws fiercely, rejoicing in his strength, and charges into the fray. He laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. He does not shy away from the sword. The quiver rattles against his side, along with the flashing spear and lance. In frenzied excitement, he eats up the ground. He cannot stand still when the trumpet sounds. At the blast of the trumpet, he snorts, "Aha!" He catches the scent of battle from afar, the shout of commanders and the battle cry. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread his wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build his nest on high? He dwells on a cliff and stays there at night, for a rocky crag is his stronghold. From there he seeks out his food. His eyes detect it from afar. His young ones feast on blood, and where the slain are, there is he. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. And that's the response, or the revelation that God gives to Job. It's obviously a very powerful speech. It's obviously something that gives us all pause for reflection. And yet, as many have said, and I think rightly, it's a speech or it's a revelation that seems to leave us with more questions than answers as to how it's supposed to assist the man Job. Clearly, it is a statement of authority. The question is it any more than a statement of authority? We can easily see God's supremacy in that speech and the massive gulf that exists between his power and control and our own. The big question is, can we see anything else? What difficulties would you identify in God's speech in terms of it being an answer to Job? Any suggestions?
God has so much power and control. Must be responsible for everything.
That's right. God is merely, along with the revelation of his power, he is identifying himself as the one who has wounded Job, necessarily. And that's made clear to the reader at the beginning and end of the book, and it's made clear to Job right now, as Brother Trevor points out. Let me identify some of the things that I see as difficulties in understanding God's first speech as helpful for Job. And as I say, I don't think we can ever find solutions until we're prepared to confess problems. And that's perhaps a generically true statement. God appears to be off topic. Perhaps you would agree with that on first appearance. Job has essentially said, "Why have you destroyed my life?" And God says, "I can control all these animals." That does not seem to be a relevant answer. The topic is off topic in content. He appears to be off topic in tone, and this is very important. Job's questions, and I think Brother Matthew articulated this a few days ago when he was presiding in the readings. Job questions about justice, and God replies in the tone of power, which is potentially disastrous. It seems to preach the doctrine, might is right, to use the common phrase. A doctrine which is very prevalent in the current world, and I live in the country that identifies itself probably accurately as the world's sole superpower. So for that reason, if they want to smash a government they don't like in Afghanistan, they will simply go there and bomb the country until the government are dead or persecuted or hiding in the hills. What is the justification for doing that? The justification is because we can. Might is right. Is that what God is teaching Job? Because Job is hollering to the heavens, "Why have you done this to me?" And God seems to be replying, "Well, I can do anything I want." Which, while true, hardly seems to describe the character of a loving father. So God appears to be insensitive to Job's problems. That sort of extends naturally from the first two bullets, doesn't it? If God is just not going to talk to Job on the subject that Job is raising, you've seen that happen in normal conversation. You ask someone a question, they just sort of brush it to one side and talk about what they want to talk about instead. Is that the nature of our God also? Because God hasn't appeared to answer Job on the questions he's asked. And God's response also, if we're brutally honest with ourselves, seems incredibly unfair. He's sort of saying to Job, you can't have justice because you can't run the world. In other words, he's saying, Job, if you could send out the snowstorms and the lightning bolts and provide the food for the lions, maybe I'd treat you fairly. But you can't, so I won't. It's a big question. It's a question that well deserves answering. And part of the reason these questions deserve answering is because you might be on the receiving end of them one day from a friend of yours who says, well, of course I don't believe the God of the Bible. These are my questions. What are your answers? So we need at times like these in Bible studies to get together and make sure that our iron is sharp so that we are in a position to say, but there are answers. In fact, in a way, if that's true, it's the ultimate catch-weight contest, isn't it? Job certainly has been foolish enough to jump up and put up his fists and try and box God. But in God's first speech, to our great surprise, it seems that God has said, okay then, and climbed into the ring. And whereas in the world, guys who weigh 130 kilograms are not permitted to climb into the ring with guys who weigh 60 kilograms, this is seen as unfair. And God seems to have stepped over the rope and wound up this massive uppercut and knocked Job into the middle of next week. Which, while it's always tempting to do that when you can, we teach ourselves and our children not to do that. If you're attacked by someone very, very much smaller than you, try and restrain yourself rather than beat them to a pulp. And yet God does not seem to have any such restraint. So these are all very powerful questions that we need to address. And I don't think the answers are going to come until we've looked at God's second speech. And I don't think Job does see the answers to God's first speech until he too has heard the second speech. The second speech unlocks the keys to the first. But before we get to the second speech, let's at least say, is there anything else we can see in the first speech which is useful, which is relevant, and which might even provide crumbs of comfort for Job? The first thing we notice, and again we've sort of spoken to this already, is that God is not limited. God does not owe us anything. This much comes out of the first speech quite clearly. In fact, if his name is I am or I will be, which is merely an expression of being, then by definition that phrase I am is unconstrained. You think about it, every time you say I am, whatever you say after the word am is actually a constraint, right? I say I am British, and you say, oh, well, you obviously have no understanding of New Zealand geography. And that's partly true because I've lived a very long way away. I say I am a scientist. And many people will say, oh, you obviously understand nothing of arts and music, which is an unfortunate conclusion because I'd like to pretend that I do, but that's the conclusion that comes to. And they say, I am male, and all sorts of assumptions are made about what I can't understand. But never mind. So I am, anything that follows that is a constraint, it's a limitation. Therefore, the being that says I am, by definition, makes no constraint. So God is unconstrained. And here's the first clues that we might get to solving something useful. Notice that all the beasts in the speeches are wild beasts. Did you notice that? There are 9 of them. And there's at least 4 species, or maybe it's 5, I forget now, that have been domesticated. But of those domesticated species, God insists that Job thinks about the wild version. Do you notice those? Look at that, the list. So for example, you have something like the lion and the raven, which are totally wild to start with, the eagle. But you also have the ox. So God says, no, think about the wild ox. But you also have the donkey. So God says, no, I want you to think about the wild donkey. You also have the horse. Now I want you to think about the wild horse, the war horse that charges in and not even afraid of a sword. So in all of those contexts, the species is either naturally wild, or even if it's a species that man has got somewhere in domesticating, God is talking about the wild version of it, the mountain goat, not the goat, sort of thing. So it's really right away God is saying, I really want you to think about, Job, there are some things that have got outside of human control. It's these things I'm gently drawing your attention towards, things that have got outside of human control. And it does preach the message. So if you can't even tether my creation, why are you attempting to develop a theology that tethers me, that says now I must do this? Because I have been righteous, I must not visit any affliction upon you. He says, don't make that mistake, Job. This is as I say, this is the easy answer. It's easy to see that God is supreme in this speech. And every expositor that's been working in the book of Job has seen this. What disappoints me is that many of the expositors, including those from our community, say that's it. That is the message. God is supreme. Be quiet before him. Be humble, say nothing, don't answer back. That's the deal. I don't think that's the deal. That shortchanges our God. Our God is more magnificent than that. And even though he is supreme, he's telling Job not only wonderful things, but also things in which Job can and does, given his brilliance, find comfort. There's a few little hints at comfort. As I say, it won't come till after the second speech. There's a few little hints right now. It's actually comforting for God to preach to Job. If you think there are things that have gone wild and out of your control, realize they haven't gone outside of my control. Because I think one of the things Job might be thinking is my entire life has gone totally haywire. You know, I had plans for my children to see them and see their grandchildren. I had plans for I was an important person in the government of the city and I was about to propose such and such, and now they all spit in my face. I had plans. Now my life was governed and organized, and now it has run amok. It has run wild. And so there's comfort in a message that says he says, Job, things that have gone outside of human control haven't gone outside my control. There's also this hint that, you know, if the lions do get to eat every day and the ravens do get to eat and the mountain goats get someone to deliver their calves for them, I have never failed to do what's needed, says God. Because part of Job's complaint is, you are failing to do what I have needs which you refuse to address. And God says, but all the needs of the creation I do address. And you'll notice in that first speech the presence of timing. I set aside the snow for the days when I want snow. I count the months until that mountain goat is ready to give birth. And then I plod my way up the mountain, and I'm there to act as midwife, to deliver those calves I wish to deliver. So he's saying there's a time for everything. So this is a very important comment, because Job is saying, I have needs, and God is replying, yes, and I address the needs at the right time. That mountain goat might have pains in pregnancy and might think I'm not there. I don't need to be there until the time is right to deliver that calf. But, bottom line, God has seemingly ignored Job's plea for answers. I think that much is only a fair assessment of God's first speech. That's how it looks, okay? And so Job, I think, thinks this also, and this is where I begin to maybe diverge from more common thinking. Job's first response, or Job's response to God's first speech, I do not think this is a satisfactory response. I don't want to be unsympathetic to Job, but where he says, oh, okay, I put my hand over my mouth, I have spoken, I will say no more. Part of the reason I think we can prove that it's not a satisfactory response is it makes God angry. Do you notice that? If you look at the beginning of chapter 40, Job makes what seems to be a humble comment where he says, oh, I've spoken, but I won't talk anymore. And God says, no, that's not good enough. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you. You will answer me. So clearly that wasn't a good response. So I feel that we have to infer that Job did get a little bit sulky at that point. And, you know, he's heard the speech. The way Job has heard the speech, which is the way I would read the speech first time, is God is saying, me big God, you little squishy thing, shut up. All right? And so Job is saying, oh, okay, fine. Well, great, thanks a lot. I was looking for help. Obviously, I'm getting none from you. Fine, I'll be quiet then, shall I? I'm absolutely no one. You are everyone, I'm no one. Fine. And so God gives Job a little shake and says, no, you can do better than that. Let's notice also, this is a bit of a strange detail to bring up, but it's going to prove very relevant. Because the natural creation is very innocent, isn't it? It is devoid of moral features. But God has actually given a slight moral slant to the natural creation in his first speech. I want to emphasize that. Many times in the Bible, 7, 8, 9 times, I forget the exact number, God is called the Lord of heaven and earth and sea. And we understand why. The entire creation is in fact developed on that threefold platform. Even the 6 days of creation actually cycle through that triangle just on 2 times in terms of the arena in which it operates. look at the beasts that I mentioned. There are 9. So you think, 9 beasts. He's the Lord of heaven and earth and sea. And you're already, if you're like me, you're running ahead and say there's going to be 3 of each. There's going to be 3 from heaven, 3 from earth, and 3 from the sea. He talks about the lion. He talks about the raven, a bird. He talks about the mountain goat. He talks about the wild donkey, the wild ox, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, and the eagle. And that's it. That's surprising. He's the Lord of heaven and earth and sea. And all the beasts that he says he controls before Job, he talks about only his control over heaven and earth. And interestingly, in that same speech, if you look in chapter 38, wherever it is, he actually gives a moral slant to the sea, which is, not true in the natural sense, but God chooses to use the sea to represent a moral feature. Can someone tell me what moral feature that is? Pride. That's interesting, because that's been the subject all along. He says to the sea, I kind of need to keep my eye on you, don't I? I need to set bars for you. Here is where your proud waves halt. I have to mark off those delineations. In fact, later in that same chapter, he will call the sea the place of death, or the gates of death. So God has chosen to represent the sea as an evil thing. Not that it is in any way wicked in its own sense, but it has pleased the Lord to take that feature of his creation and say, if I want to represent pride, I'm going to talk about it being located in the sea. And in the first speech, he doesn't talk about any beasts that come out of the sea. He talks about the innocent natural creation found in heaven and earth, the birds and the beasts, which kind of gives you a hint as to where the second speech might be headed in 2 different ways. Firstly, that it will transition from the natural creation into the spiritual. And secondly, that if he's identified the sea as the source of pride, he might be going on to talk about a big, powerful beast that in fact comes out of the sea, and therefore we already can guess what it represents. The sea is shown to host pride, and so we can guess maybe pride will be the finale of that second speech. There's a developing focus on pride. Have you noticed that? Elihu, who was the one who introduced God's word, identified pride as being the fatal feature for man. He says a lot of things, so it's easy to miss it, but Elihu says, God may speak in men's ears and terrify them with warnings, but he says God has a purpose of salvation. He wants to turn man from wrongdoing and keep him from pride, to preserve his soul from the pit, his life from perishing from the sword. So Elihu is actually identified, he says pride is actually fatal. And that's the reason that God might do impactful things in a man's life, to turn him from pride. And now we've just read the first speech, and we've seen the sea identified, and that's the only moral feature that's given in the entire speech. Seriously, scan chapters 38 and 39. You will find no other moral features, good or evil. The only moral feature that features is pride. And then God makes comments in the interlude. The interlude, by the way, is just that little bit where God and Job have a little interchange just before the second speech. That's what I call it. You can call it anything. And do you notice what God focuses on? Here then is Job's answer, and I suggest to you it's an unsatisfactory answer because it doesn't please God, and God doesn't say, oh, you have spoken of me that which is right at this stage. So Job is saying, I am unworthy, how can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth, I spoke once, but I have no answer, twice, but I will say no more. And I'm suggesting to you he's not saying that in a good spirit. I think he's completely beaten down. He realizes God is his last chance, and he now finally thinks, oh, and God sold me down the river as well. He's not going to help me, he's just going to say he's the boss. I give up. He's thrown in the towel. And so God says, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Do you have an arm like God's, and can your voice thunder like his? Look at these words. I've emphasized them as you see. Look at every proud man and bring him low. Just in case you've missed it. Look at every proud man and humble him. Then I myself will admit to you that your own right hand can save you. Do you see the astonishing principle that's there? I'll just spell it out. God actually says, if you can defeat pride, you don't need me. That is, it might be hyperbole, but this is what that says. If you can take on the beast of pride and beat it down yourself, then I myself, I, Almighty God, will admit to you, you don't need me as your God. You're doing fine on your own. Your salvation will indeed come by works, if you can do this. It's true in theory, and therefore the implication is it cannot happen in practice. So you see how this focus onto pride has come absolutely front and center. Don't be distracted by the natural creation. That is the point that God is developing towards. So then we go into God's second speech. And if you're thinking I have not yet given an adequate explanation of the first speech, you're totally fine, because again, that hasn't come yet until we get through the second speech. And in the second speech, you know that there are seemingly two beasts presented. Behemoth, it's actually a plural noun, so the herd of Behemoth, I suppose, a land beast, and ultimately Leviathan, the sea beast. This is a older piece of artwork from William Blake back in the early 19th century. And astonishingly, I noticed that Blake has deliberately represented Behemoth and Leviathan as two halves of the same circle. You can see that. I don't know what he means by that, but I'm about to agree with him, if he means what I think he means. Here's the first suggestion I wish to make to you, that God's second speech is all about the spiritual creation, not the natural creation. This is a general principle. I haven't justified that, but I will. This is a general principle that God works. From 1 Corinthians 15, first comes the natural creation, then comes the spiritual creation. In anything God does, first there is the natural kingdom, then there is the spiritual kingdom. First there is the natural man Adam, then there is the spiritual man Christ. First you are born of your mothers, then you are born of water and of the Spirit. Always this way. First Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then he tells them he's the bread from heaven, etc. The examples flow through the scriptures. First there is the Old Testament, then there is the New Testament. The natural and then the spiritual, every time. And God gives two speeches. So I think it's entirely natural to say, first there is the natural creation, then he wants to talk about the spiritual. Let's justify that. And we need to spend a little time here, because so many expositors of the book of Job will suggest that the second speech is just two more animals. Specifically, most commonly, occasionally a dinosaur and a whale are suggested, but the commonest, and it's permeated our society completely, is the idea that Behemoth represents a hippopotamus and Leviathan represents a crocodile. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes completely dismantling this idea, because it's getting in the way of us seeing what God is really saying, I suggest to you. There are very many reasons to suppose this cannot be the reason. Number one, why would God give a second speech about two more beasts? He's listed 9 in the first speech. Here come 10 and 11 in the second speech. Now, if it was me doing this, there'd be a very simple explanation. I forgot. You know, I meant to do 11 things this morning, and I did 9 of them. And then it's like, oh yes, that's right, and I'll do 2 more, because I don't remember everything. But that can't be true for God. So he must have always intended to have spoken 2 separate times. Perhaps even more compellingly, the revelation of a hippopotamus and a crocodile doesn't help Job. It's the ultimate insensitivity. Job is saying, why did my children have to die? And God is saying, do you see what a marvelous job I did designing that crocodile? Look at that thing. That is awesome. Right? That is not my God. I am excited about the God that I see in the book of Job, and if that were my God, I would be disconsolate. And I think many people are disconsolate when they read the book of Job, and I understand why. Because if that is the explanation, it's a disaster. Point 3, how did that convince? We know that the answer Job gave after the first speech, he was beaten down and disconsolate. How then would the revelation of a hippopotamus and a crocodile have helped? He's already mentioned the lion and the raven. We're now supposed to believe that God said, do you realize I made the lion, I made the raven? And Job's like, yeah, but how does that help me? And then God says, yeah, but I also made the hippopotamus. And Job says, oh, that makes sense now. I've got it. Absolutely, how silly, right? This does not make any credible sense, that this is just 2 more beasts. The hippopotamus and the crocodile would not convince if the previous 9 beasts did not of anything. Another point to notice, they don't fit the descriptions. You notice from chapter 40, Behemoth has a tail like a cedar tree. Now, how many people have actually seen a hippopotamus in real life? Right, okay, so hopefully you are now disabused of this notion that that's a hippopotamus. The tail is this flabby-looking thing about the size of my forearm, and the occasional little curl to it. And now apparently the thing is quite strong. I asked a zookeeper that, but really, you're saying that it's like a cedar tree is probably a bit of a stretch. Now Leviathan, fire streams from his mouth. Please, no, and smoke coils from his nostrils. This is not an accurate description of these beasts. They are not physical beasts. Also notice there's a fundamentally different content between speech 1 and speech 2. Let me put that examples in front of you. The beasts of the first speech are described according to natural characteristics, but the beasts of the second speech are described in terms of personality, in terms of character traits, what you might call spiritual characteristics, and they're always presented in terms of the relationship they have on man. Let's look at the evidence. There's just a few clauses pulled almost at random from all the beasts in the first speech. They hunt prey, they satisfy their hunger, they crouch down to give birth, they range the hills, they lay eggs, they spread their wings to the south. These are clearly natural features of natural animals. But when you look at the second speech, you see a very, very different set of descriptions. They don't match the descriptions on the left-hand side at all. You're talking about something that clearly spends a lot of its time wrestling with man, successfully so. No man can capture him. Look at that second one. He won't beg for mercy. That can't be an animal. There's not an animal on earth except man who understands the concept of mercy. You can't make a pet of him. Mighty men retreat before him. Nothing on earth is his equal. And here's a big clue as the closing statement. He is king of the proud. Now, given that developing focus that we've had all this time on pride, that is actually the closing clause of the second speech that God leaves ringing in Job's ears. And remember what Job had said? Remember when the words of Job are ended in chapter 31? What was the last thing that Job said? He said, I'm going to put God's false accusation on my shoulder, and I'm put a crown on my head, and I'm going to approach God as a prince. And Job says, God says, you're a prince, are you? Let me show you your king. Okay, there's a direct connection there between the last thing Job has said to God and the last thing God has said to Job. He says, this is your king, is Leviathan, the king of the proud. Do you still want to serve in that monarchy? So what then are Behemoth and Leviathan? It's not a hippopotamus, it's not a crocodile. I think we can be convinced on this. What then are they? I want to suggest to you that they are both aspects of the one beast. And that one beast is human pride, the king of the proud. Now, so this idea of why on earth would there be two beasts if it's supposed to be the same thing being described, push that question to one side. We'll come back for it in a minute. Let's just see if we can justify the central core of the argument. Is it fair to say that Behemoth and Leviathan are descriptions of human pride? Which, of course, if it is, means that God is completely on topic, because that's the Satan. That's what started everything in chapter 1, the presence of the Satan. God would now be revealing the very core character who has been hidden since chapter 1 under some moniker that we can't easily define. God is now bringing revelation where before there has been mystery. This tends to be his aspect. Evidence 1, God's second speech is prompted by Job's need for salvation from pride. Again, look at how it's stressed there. Job, pride is your enemy. Pride is the thing that can kill you. And I'm here to help you. And, let's just look at natural matches between the clauses that are used of these beasts and the characteristics of human pride. First of all, it's Behemoth who I made along with you. Now, that could be, if you're talking about day 6 of creation, of course it could be any of the beasts of the field, including the hippopotamus, I openly acknowledge. But what if that comment is a little bit more profound than that? I made this along, you have within you the power to choose to serve self. I gave you this free will, and if you abuse it through your craftiness, you will choose to be proud and serve yourself. It's something I made very much along with you. He has bones of bronze. Well, bronze, again, I wish I had time to demonstrate this, but I think it's reasonably well accepted. Bronze is a biblical symbol for pride and stubbornness. Why? Because bronze as a metal is hard. That's its principal feature. If you sculpt, if you're a sculptor, you're going to the last thing you want is bronze. You'll work in clay, so it's malleable, and then when you're finished, you cast it in bronze. So all the sculptures you see around in national parks and whatever are all cast in bronze because it's rock hard and the weather won't change it. And that's why when God talks about bronze in the scriptures, he says, you've got a forehead of bronze, you guys do, because I can't mold you. It's like you're already cast and finished. Behemoth, it said, ranks first among God's works. Now, how can that be the hippopotamus or any other creature? That which was primary among the works of God was, of course, the man Adam. He was the one setting precedence. This is provable from Genesis chapter 1. You don't need to look it up. In chapter 41, verse 11, and we've kind of segued into Leviathan here, this beast demands payment from God. Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Well, we know who makes a claim against God. It's Job. And every such proud man that says, I did not deserve this. God has denied me justice. He owes me better than this. Who has a claim against me I must pay? The beast that demands payment from God is prideful man. We are told that Leviathan, fire shoots from his mouth. And what's the scripture that makes you think about fire and mouths? James. Yes, it's true. It's kind of a proof that it's a symbolic reference. The tongue, man's tongue, it also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. Interestingly, also spoken of as that thing that man couldn't control. Right? And he is king of the proud, while Job had declared himself as a prince. That's a statement. So those are some of the clauses that are spoken of. And I think it's fairly easy to see their comparison with human pride. It's prideful man on each occasion. As a brief aside, you might notice that King Nebuchadnezzar, who spoke in great pride, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Notice the spirit of his punishment. God could have done anything to him, but what God said was, I'm going to make you live like a wild animal. And I think now I see why. If God sees pride as a wild rampaging beast, and then Nebuchadnezzar starts prancing around like a wild rampaging beast, God says, fine, I'm not particularly angry, but if you're going to be a wild beast, why don't you come over here and live where the wild beasts live, and graze on grass and do all the things that wild beasts do, until you learn to be a human. And when you're a human, you can go back and be a human and live like a human. Man's pride is the wild beast. So God's first speech concerns wild animals of the natural world that only he can tame, but God's second speech concerns human pride, the wild beast that only his word can tame. And the point is, this helps Job. God is on topic. God is not saying, oh, forget your petty concerns. I want to talk about something else. God is absolutely on topic with what Job needs to hear. And to that point, let me just almost reenact, just rethink everything that's happened. And we want to do it twice. Once from Job's perspective, which is pretty much what's written, and then once, if possible, from God's perspective. That takes a bit of a leap for us, of course. So Job is saying, I have been subjected to huge misery. Terrible things have happened to me. 3 of my former friends have turned up and have basically pointed the finger at me and said it's all my fault for my sins, and I know that to be untrue. So I've cried out to my God to help me, and God has said, I can control the animals and you can't. Me big God, you little hopeless person. Be quiet. So I said to God, well, you're not even speaking to my point, are you? You're not even on topic. I can't believe it. I'll just be quiet then, because you won't even talk to me about what I need to hear. That's what Job has seen, and he's disconsolate at that point, at the end of the first speech. Let's see this now from God's perspective. And that's almost an arrogant thing to say. We can never see it from God's perspective, but given the word of God, we can get maybe a leg up and try. God sees pride as a wild, rampaging beast. He sees that beast has essentially consumed 3 men that he figures he can otherwise save. So he has his priest, Job, and he thinks, I can cause suffering in the life of my priest so that I can extract the 3 men I want to save from the belly of this monstrous beast that has eaten them. And so as he's working with this, and he has to bring them into proximity, then his priest makes a poor decision. And his priest says, oh yeah, I can fight these people. I can fight this beast. But Job is only fighting the intellectual arguments of the friends. He hasn't seen the beast. This beast, though massive and rampant and thrashing, is invisible to Job. We're looking on the spiritual plane. And so God thinks, oh, this is not going to go well. My dear son and my chosen priest has decided to engage with the Satan, and he's only a righteous man. He can't win. And so the Satan, pride, infects Job and grabs Job. And so this wild beast has now got Job in his teeth and is kind of thrashing around and shaking him, and Job is ready to die. And this is the point where God says, I need to intercede. Because the wild beast, think of a massive beast that would fill this platform, has got Job in his teeth. And so it's at that point that God walks up to this situation, this beast that Job can't see, but he's in the mouth of, and sort of taps Job on the shoulder and says, Job, do you have much luck controlling wild beasts? You can see why he says that. And of course, Job can't see why God would say that and say, what are you talking about wild beasts for? I'm talking about why am I suffering? I give up. I'm not talking to you. I'll just shut up then. And that's why God gives Job a little shake. He says, no. Man up now. Brace yourself like a man. You can answer me. You are my excellent disciple. You can do better than this. Do you have much luck controlling wild beasts, Job? Because if you can't control the beasts of the natural creation, what about the wild beast, Job? The wild beast. Let me give you a few clues as to the wild beast. Let me describe his strength and his scales. Let's see what happens. Have you seen this beast anywhere, Job? And so brilliant is the man Job. He gets it. And he sees the spiritual scene on first hearing of those two speeches. And he realizes, I am in the jaws of Leviathan. My God hasn't turned up to rebuke me. My God has turned up to extract me. He's here for my salvation. And if he can see the beast, then by extension he can see the beast in its previous workings. This beast was killing my friends. I have been brought to save them. How can I think God treats me as garbage? God has chosen me as the very vessel to extract my three friends who would otherwise die from the belly of this beast. The beast that's now got me in its jaws. I am highly honored. No wonder I need all this suffering to come upon me, because otherwise it would not provoke the pride of my friends to come to the fore so that God could judge it and excise it. I am an integral part of God's plan of salvation for three people who I love. Although I feel a bit mad at them today, but I love them. Wow, what a revelation. And so he sees God's speeches right from the first word to the last have been absolutely on topic and have completely explained why all those sufferings needed to come upon him, albeit in this very arcane language, which has allowed Job to see what the central thread of the argument has always been. Since we can't control the wild beast, the word of God must come along to kill it for us. If we fight it, even if we're righteous, and we're not as righteous as Job, we will lose. And Job sees all this. And so he sees, I've been helped. I've been saved. And so his second answer is very different from his first. God is helping Job, not belittling him. These speeches are not designed to communicate God's supremacy. In everything God does, he gives evidence of his supremacy. This is never to be denied. But the speeches are designed to bring Job that understanding of how much he is loved and how much he has been helped. Can Job control the wild earth? Is the foundation for speech 2. Can Job control the wild beast? And Job understands his answer. Leviathan has been roused, and because of the coming of the word of God, defeated, and he has been saved. Surely, says Job, I did speak of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. And I suggest to you he is in a joyous frame of mind when he says this, because now he sees a reason for all that has been. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Now there's a major fly in this ointment that we're going to deal with tomorrow. The one thing Job must not say, if I'm right, is now I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Right? Because that's not common with the mindset I'm trying to present. So let's just tear that verse out and throw it away, which is always what you need to do if you come to an inconvenience in the Bible. Okay. No, let's worry about that verse tomorrow. For now, it won't be tomorrow, it'll be this evening. Let's worry about that verse in the next talk. For now, let's not concern ourselves with it. For now, let's enjoy and celebrate the fact that I suggest to you that Job is relieved and joyful. How could a proximate experience of one's Maker cause you anything else? All of the writings to date say once you've really met God, you tremble and you shake and you crawl away on your knees and you realize you're disgusting. Well, whilst that aspect may be true, I don't think that's the experience of our Maker that God desires for us, because else that would be all that the kingdom was about, knowing how vile we were before. No, there is a far greater joy in meeting one's Maker than that. But I think Job realized what a foolish comment it must have been way back at the beginning when he says, I curse my birthday. May those who curse days curse my birthday. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan, because Leviathan surely was roused and came along. And there it is with Job in his very jaws as he boasted about strutting around in front of God like a prince. So the last point we need to address today is say, well, okay, fine, I might accept that. But goodness me, there really was a behemoth and there really was a Leviathan, and these were two different beasts. So you're just trying to sort of shove them all together because you've got one thing to say, and you're cheating a bit. Why would there be two evidently different descriptions of the same beast, or different aspects from the same beast? Well, part of the reason we have to resolve these two beasts as one is because both of them are described as number one. You can't have two different beasts who are number one. You can't have, two different cricket teams that, hold the Ashes. It's not possible. Only one can be the winner. Right? So, by extension. Looking, therefore, at the scriptures, I wish I was in the other country to say that, but you sell lots of DVDs over there. Behemoth, he ranks first amongst the works of God. Okay? He's number one. Okay, well, if Behemoth is number one, then Leviathan at best can be number two. Okay? And his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rod of iron. Well, hang on. Leviathan is king. So Leviathan is king and Behemoth is number one. Furthermore, Leviathan seems to be stronger than Behemoth because he treats iron and bronze like straw and rotten wood. So clearly, you can't have two superiors unless they're two aspects of exactly the same beast. And if they are, then they're two visions bearing the same message. Where have we seen that before? Genesis. Yes. In which specific case? Thank you. Joseph and Pharaoh. That's right. Two visions with the same message. If Behemoth is Leviathan, or different aspects of the same beast, why the repeat? The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. I had the dreams about the cows, fat and thin. I had the dreams about the ears of corn, fat and thin. But the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same, says Joseph. God just gave you the same vision twice in different aspects. So Pharaoh says, well, why? And Joseph said, for this reason. What did he say? It will surely, exactly, there are two reasons. Thank you, Maria. That's one of them. It will surely come to pass, and the other one I heard from over here. The reason, Joseph explains, the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So what is the vision? The vision is the thrashing beast being rebuked and controlled only by the word of God. Taming the beast, the Satan, can only happen by the word of God. And because this vision is given in two forms, this is the template we understand and has been explained to us. We are using the Bible to interpret itself. God has firmly decided that he will tame the beast, and he will do it soon. You are in chapter 41 of Job, and you turn the page, and what do you find? I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So that lends independent credibility to the fact that the taming of the beast is the rebuke of the friends. Because God gives that twofold vision, like he did to Pharaoh. I've firmly decided to do this, and I'm going to do it soon. And the next thing, the last thing almost that you see, is God rebuking the pride of the friends. And that makes everything, the entire book now, from chapters 1 through 42, is on the same topic. There's no random loose ends. The three friends aren't just random friends while Satan was someone else. The description of Leviathan wasn't just God boasting about a crocodile, which has nothing to do with anything. Right? All of this ties together as one coherent storyline. This is further evidence that Leviathan is also a depiction of the wild beast, that Satan, which had caused all the problems that frustrated salvation. That's where we're going to go. We have not solved everything here because we still need to know why Job seemed disconsolate and why he said he repented in dust and ashes. That still needs to be solved. But I want to leave you with the assertion, if you'll trust me on that point just for a few hours until we can address the final talk, I want to leave you very much with the notion that by the time Job had heard the second speech, he understood the entirety of God's work with himself and his friends, and he was in a lightened and joyous state of mind. This is a good story that God has given us. And not when I say story, I don't mean that as a belittling word. This is a beautiful account of how God and how those who are resonant with God are brought to a happy state by a proximate experience of their Maker. And that's a very intentional message that I would happy to leave with you on January the 1st. And with that, have a very happy new year.